stands a chimney so tall, it says Aragon Mill. But there's no smoke at all coming out of that stack, for the mill has shut down and it ain't coming back. And the only tune I hear is the sound of the wind as it blows through the town. Weave and spin, weave and spin. There's no children left to play on these narrow, empty streets. All the looms are shut down. It's so quiet I can't sleep. For the mill has shut down. It's the only life I know. Tell me, where can I go? Tell me, where can I go? And the only tune I hear is the sound of the wind as it blows through the town. Weave and spin, weave and spin. Too old to work and I'm too young to die. Is there no place to go for my husband and I? For the mill has shut down. It's the only life I know. Tell me, where can I go? Tell me, where can I go? And the only tune I hear is the sound of the wind as it blows through the town. Weave and spin, weave and spin. And the only tune I hear is the sound of the wind as it blows through the town. Weave and spin, weave and spin.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Well, we have a wonderful service with Charlie today, and we were going to have a musician come in, but unfortunately he called in sick. So Karis is going to be performing and doing a wonderful job, I'm sure. Our music director, I'm sorry, I should have said that. So our first piece of music will be an instrumental, and if you wish to sing along, please feel free to use these following words: keep going, explore, and stay steadfast. Karis, thank you. Sorry, we lost a bit of equipment here. Searching for it. Welcome to Holston Valley Unitarian Universalist Church. I am Deb, and I serve this church as the treasurer. If you are with us on the internet, or you're sitting with us in the chairs around me, we are one community, united in our commitment to each other and our commitment to live our principles in the world. Our guest speaker today is Charlie. Charlie is springboarding off Reverend Tiffany's sermon entitled, More Ethical Than a God, to help us grapple with the very big question of how to bridge the gap from a narrative to a personal moral. He will introduce the concept of moral constructivism as a framework for investigating this question. Charlie has been a member of this church for about 5 years, stewardship trustee for about 3 of those years, and participant of the MACHO group, which stands for Men Achieving Community Helping Others. He is the proud father of 3 and husband of 1, with a doctorate in chemistry and 15 years experience in industry. His hobbies include basketball, philosophy, chess, and a good scotch. Please silence your cell phones, and please respect the fragrance-free zone, which is back over here. We have activity bags by the welcome table, that's over there, for any of our younger friends who might be more comfortable with something to do during the service. Please take them back to the welcome table as the service ends. We have a nursery downstairs for ages kindergarten and under, and you can bring your kids down to the nursery anytime you like. Masks are optional but supported here. Our services are recorded and are on YouTube. Please stay home if you're sick.
In the words of 18th century Scottish philosopher David Hume, in every system of morality which I have hitherto met with, I have always remarked that the author proceeds for some time in the ordinary way of reasoning when of a sudden I am surprised to find that instead of the usual copulation of propositions is and is not, I meet with no proposition that is not connected with an ought or ought not. This change is imperceptible, but is, however, of the last consequence. For as this ought or ought not expresses some new relation or affirmation, 'tis necessary that it should be observed and explained, and at the same time that a reason should be given for what seems altogether inconceivable. How this new relation can be a deduction from others which are entirely different from it. We welcome you, old friends and new, young and old. You are an essential part of our celebration today, whether today is your first or your 1000th Sunday with us. We are stronger because of your presence. We are one people of many beliefs, many origins, sexualities, and genders. We are all growing, all learning, all loved. Just as you are welcome here.
From one dad to all those who fill the role of dad, I wish you all a happy Father's Day. As a dad myself, I have plenty of evenings spent reading stories to my 3 children. And in fact, it is my youngest who recommended the story for today. So right now, I want to invite the kids, youth, parents, and young at heart to join us for a time of all ages. We are managing the camera angles to keep you off camera, so you don't have to worry about being on YouTube. So come, join us for a story.
And this story includes an event that was initially viewed as bad, but is later viewed as good. And it raises the question of how we or the characters might make that judgment. And so this story is by Sanjay Patel and Emily Haynes. Ganesha is a Hindu god. He's very important and powerful, and a tad chubby. But when he was a kid, he was just like any other kid, except that he had an elephant's head and cruised around on a magical mouse collecting fruit, rice, sweets, and other gifts from the temples in his neighborhood. Ganesha loved to eat sweets and candy, especially the traditional Indian dessert laddu. His best friend, Mr. Mouse, could eat only one at a time, which was okay by Ganesha. He didn't want to share all of his laddus. Squeak! One day, while Ganesha and Mr. Mouse were out looking for sweets, they discovered a new kind of laddu, the super jumbo jawbreaker laddu. Ganesha snatched up the shiny treat and was about to eat it right there on the spot. Wait, squeaked Mr. Mouse. Don't eat it, it's a jawbreaker. It'll break your tusk. But I'm a god, said Ganesha. I'm invincible. Ganesha caught the laddu in his mouth. He bit down. and squeak, snap. Oh no, Mr. Mouse yelled. How will I ever put my tusk back on? Ganesha wailed. Ganesha was very clever and tried all sorts of ideas. What if I tie it on with string? What if I stick it on with glue? Maybe I could just hold it on with my hand, but nothing worked. I look lopsided, he said. Everyone will laugh at me. No, they won't, said Mr. Mouse. Everyone loses their teeth. And besides, you already have an elephant's head, and your friends still love you. Ganesha wasn't convinced. He thought he looked awful. He took all his anger and frustration and hurled his tusk at the moon. But the tusk didn't hit the moon. It sailed over a bush and hit the head of an old man who was walking by. Is this your tusk? The old man asked. I'm sorry, said Ganesha. I didn't mean to hit you. I was aiming for the moon. What's your name? I'm Ganesha, and this is Mr. Mouse. You're Ganesha, the old man exclaimed. I've been looking for you. I'm Vyasa, the poet, and I need a special scribe for a poem. It's so long that no man can ever write the whole thing. All the pens in the world would break before it was done. I'm not a man, said Ganesha, and I love stories, but I don't have anything to write with. What about your tusk? Vyasa asked. That's just a big tooth, Ganesha said. It's a very special tooth, Vyasa explained, handing Ganesha a piece of paper. Give it a try. Ganesha took the paper and pressed down with the tip of his tusk. It made a mark. Ganesha was so excited that he drew a flower, and a tree, and a picture of Mr. Mouse, along with a few of his other favorite things. I love my tusk, said Ganesha. I'd be happy to help you. What is the story about? The beginning of things, said Vyasa. It's rather hard to sum up. It's called the Mahabharata. As Vyasa spoke, Ganesha put his tusk to the paper and began writing. Soon he forgot all about the super jumbo jawbreaker Ladu and how funny he looked. He even forgot about the sweets he wanted to eat. 100,000 verses later, Ganesha put down his tusk. The Mahabharata, the great epic of Hindu literature, was complete. Ganesha peeked around a stack of paper and saw that Mr. Mouse had been eating his way through the Ladus as they worked. The poem had taken a very long time. But Ganesha was happy to see there were still a few left for him and his friends. And that concludes the story of Ganesha and his sweet tooth. Raise your hand if Ganesha breaking his tusk was only a bad thing. Who thinks it was only a good thing? Who thinks maybe it was a bad thing followed by a good thing? Awesome. Well, thank you for learning with us today, and I hope you enjoyed the story.
Thank you. Come to this community with all that you are. Your joys and your concerns are welcome here. We share our moments of joys and sorrows by using these candle cards if you are with us in person, or by emailing Reverend Tiffany at minister@hvууc.org with the words "candle card" in the subject line. Please make sure to indicate whether or not you would like the card read aloud in the service, which is broadcast publicly on YouTube. We have a card today from Noelle, who is thankful for a wonderful hike at the breaks. And I can tell you that we had a lovely time, and it was great that we had someone who knew the area very well guide us along. And today we honor and acknowledge fathers on Father's Day. And we acknowledge that there are those for whom the day carries pain, and if this is you, we hold you in our hearts. Happy Pride Month. And for all who celebrate the holiday of Juneteenth, which is on June 19th, we celebrate with you in joy, in spirit and joy. If you wish to light your own candle, approach the side of the table that is closest to you, and the closest candle keeper, either Vonda or Noel, will assist you. Please light the candles from the furthest away to the closest in that section to avoid those after you having to reach over an open flame. If you wish for us to light a candle for you, please raise your hand until I acknowledge you, and we will light a candle. We light our first candle, Vonda, for you who are not in the building, but are ever in our hearts and mind. Light our final candle for all that remains unspoken in our hearts, in our mind.
Hi, good morning. I'm excited today to get into a little philosophy and explore some underpinnings of our morality. You may remember Reverend Tiffany provided a sermon in mid-May on ethics. I had already selected my topic for this sermon by then and was thrilled to hear her speak on it. Gave me a nice introduction. Well, in her sermon, she described the three responses in an ancient world where gods were generally regarded as a source of why suffering occurs. She also pointed out the interesting inversion of charging God as a source of morality, a clever strategy to legitimize political power, and ended by asking us where we derive our ethics. I would like to pick up where she left off by exploring the major classes of ethical systems and how they might map onto the UU perspective. Just to be clear, I'm not attempting to tell you what is moral, but I am offering some concepts developed over the centuries to help us think about the question. Please consider this an introduction that is not exhaustive. Sorry if your favorite counterpoint doesn't get mentioned. I'd love to talk about it sometime over coffee hour. First, I need to clarify my use of the terms ethics and morals. It is relatively common to use them interchangeably. In other cases, ethics is used to refer to institutional or professional rules of conduct. For our present purposes, I think it's instructive to consider our 7 principles as the UU ethic. These principles were, of course, established through a democratic process of individuals who agreed to ratify them based on their own moral intuitions. So in this sense, morals refers to our personal beliefs of right and wrong. The ethic indicates points of overlap between the individuals, but there are undoubtedly a host of individual morals that didn't make the list. Notice there could be this feedback loop between the ethical and moral. As individuals study the principles, they can learn and perhaps shift their personal perspectives, and ethics can also change as the community values shift. While this distinction is useful, for the remainder of the sermon, the terms will be used as equivalent, just to avoid any confusion between different texts that are referenced. It's also important to recognize that any moral statement depends greatly on what you take to be true about reality. Our 4th principle, to responsibly search for truth and meaning, is foundational to building a moral framework. Moreover, our 3rd principle encourages spiritual growth, which is presumably only possible if we can learn both what is true and deepen or expand our sources of meaning. There is, however, a challenge to how we can accomplish both principles, as articulated in the passage read during the chalice lighting. David Hume famously pointed out that no one can logically derive an ought from an is. No collection of facts implies what one should do. To make a moral statement about what one should do requires an extra set of information about how to derive values. This is the bridge from truth to meaning. Truth, in my submission, is a statement of what is, and meaning is the relation of truth to values. Where shoulds emerge from meaning resides the gap between narrative and morals. You can again see a feedback loop between truth and meaning, as meaning cannot exist without a source of truth, but frequently the narratives we hold shape the truths we permit. Which questions are asked? Which facts are gathered? Which set is judged interesting to explain? Which narratives fit with the ones already accepted? There's a bias on how we accumulate an understanding of what is, and it permeates the process of constructing our morals. Our sense of ought or should as a nebulous feeling or an impulse likely has a complex evolutionary origin. While there are many adaptations we have inherited from our non-human ancestors, the field of evolutionary psychology can provide some insight into the developmental roots of our mental and emotional experience as Homo sapiens. I don't intend to provide a review of the relevant research here, but there is an accessible summary of a few key points in the book Sapiens by Yuval Harari. One passage highlights an important concept, quote, "For nearly the entire history of our species, sapiens lived as foragers. The past 200 years, during which ever-increasing number of sapiens have obtained their daily bread as urban laborers and office workers, and the preceding 10,000 years, during which most sapiens lived as farmers and herders, are the blink of an eye compared to tens of thousands of years during which our ancestors hunted and gathered. Evolutionary psychologists argue that we need to delve into the hunter-gatherer world that shaped us, the world that we subconsciously still inhabit. There are 2 reasons I bring up the natural origins of our moral intuitions. The first is that they likely arose and were conserved over time because they represented a selective advantage in that context. As we now occupy a radically different physical context for survival, those same traits may not be reliable indicators of useful behaviors. Second, just because an intuition developed naturally does not make it right in any objective sense. Such an appeal to nature should make us question our moral intuitions to see which stand up to scrutiny. For the scrutiny, we can look to moral philosophy to understand the different systems that have been built. Even though most people approach morality informally, when we look at rigorously constructed paradigms, it becomes more clear what choices slant a person towards various perspectives. Across systems, the should is often derived from a principle or value that is being optimized or prioritized. This formal description and evaluation of standards for right and wrong is the study of normative ethics. One dimension of consideration is the degree to which morality is taken to be objective versus subjective. Is there a right answer that we can discover? Is it completely subjective with no right answer? Or are there objective ways to have better or worse subjective experiences? Another dimension is principles versus consequences. There's a constellation of paradigms surrounding consequentialism, which judges morality based on outcomes. A behavior is right if the impact is positive in some particular way. This can be contrasted with deontology, where certain principles are judged to be moral independent of the circumstances. There is a duty to behave in a particular way, such as always being honest. Here's a moral dilemma to help exemplify the distinction. You're an eyewitness to a crime. A man has robbed a bank, but instead of keeping the money for himself, he donates it to a poor orphanage that can now afford to feed, clothe, and care for its children. You know who committed the crime. If you go to the authorities with the information, there's a good chance the money will be returned to the bank, leaving a lot of kids in need. What do you do? This moral dilemma only clarifies the process of deciding what's right, but not the outcome. While there may be disagreements about whether the orphanage is relevant to deciding what to do, both paradigms could decide going to the authorities is the moral choice. Two other general categories of normative ethics are virtue ethics and pragmatism. Virtue ethics was more widely adopted in the ancient world and judges morality as character traits, to be good or bad in some manner. A virtue is a trait that makes its possessor a good person, and a vice is a trait that makes its possessor a bad person. Obviously, at this point in history, we've hopefully dropped this association of good and bad behavior with immutable character traits. However, there are cognitive biases today that still reflect this type of thinking, such as the halo effect and the fundamental attribution error. I'm not going into them, but it's worthwhile to be aware that we can fall into this trap. Pragmatists expect what's considered right to change over time, as they focus on the social process of learning how to be moral and the empirical approach to moral progress. A modern example of pragmatism was articulated in the book The Moral Landscape by Sam Harris. In it, he lays out the case that the ultimate good is human flourishing, and we could objectively learn ways to minimize human suffering through science. It fits the pragmatist paradigm of expecting moral progress through changing and improving moral judgments with experimentation. There are some classical practical objections, but I share it as a great example of the is-ought problem. How do we establish that human flourishing is objectively good? This might seem like a silly question, but there are a number of well-articulated arguments collectively known as antinatalism that posit human procreation is inherently bad. One reason being that our presence leads to mass extinction of other species, and another being that the prospective child cannot consent to being subjected to suffering, which is inherent to any life, or possibly inherent to every life. Now, clearly, my 3 kids testify to my rejection of this view. But if human flourishing can be denied as ideal, then we can't expect to escape moral ambiguity. In a discussion of the foundation of morals, I have to mention the creator of moral foundation theory, Dr. Jonathan Haidt. He is a social psychologist from NYU, well known for his efforts to identify moral intuitions common among people across the globe. His theory is based on an evolutionary psychology perspective that gives primacy to emotional reactions, which has a much longer evolutionary history than logic and reason. His group found a statistically significant set of 5 values that they labeled innate moral foundations. In his book, The Righteous Mind, he shares how differences in the magnitude of how these moral intuitions are valued by different groups as having explanatory power for cultural differences. For example, there are linear changes in the perceived relevance of these moral foundations as one crosses the political spectrum. Again, there are moral foundations shared by all, but vary in relative priority. The important point in this work is summarized in the subtitle, How Good People Are Divided by Religion and Politics. It's by understanding others' moral perspectives that we can reduce animosity associated with political polarization and other cultural misunderstandings. He argues that it is a common source of frustration when parties on opposite sides of an issue try to convince each other with reasons. When the other person is not convinced, there's some sense they're not being rational or just immoral. The mistake is to assume they share your moral perspective. Both parties, in principle, can accept the same facts and judge them differently, perhaps irreconcilably, while both being equally rational and moral. He suggests appealing to the emotional associations that are the basis of moral intuitions. The debates have raged about how to interpret this work, and it highlights another dimension along which moral systems vary, which is realism. A common anti-realist position is moral relativism, in which these varying moral perspectives cannot be judged as more or less correct. A moral realist would claim there is a real answer, whether it can be known objectively or not. Pardon. In the spirit of entertaining an idea with which we may disagree, a clear example from the moral realism perspective is divine command theory, developed for centuries through notable contributors such as St. Augustine and Kierkegaard. The central idea is that what is moral is determined by God's commands, and that for a person to be moral is to follow God's commands. There are a variety of versions and alternatives, for example, focusing God's motivations instead of the commands as the core source of goodness. Clearly, this category of ethical systems is essential to traditional religions. One challenge these systems seek to avoid is the Euthyphro dilemma. Plato wrote how Socrates asked Euthyphro, is the pious loved by the gods because it is pious, or is it pious because it is loved by the gods? This was restated in the 17th century by Leibniz as, quote, there remains the question whether it is good and just because God wills it, or whether God wills it because it is good and just. The threat of this dilemma to divine command theory is that if God commands something because it is good, then God's command isn't what makes it moral. Moreover, if there's a reason to judge something as good, then we don't need God to make that judgment. We just need to understand the reason. Of course, if there's no reason, just the force of his will, then good is arbitrary. Given this background, we can look at the common replies to Reverend Tiffany's question to see the type of moral and ethical culture we have here at HVUUC. We frequently heard sentiments about learning together, skepticism of absolute objective answers, openness to exploration of ideas and experiences, along with a place reserved for important principles that we hold dear, but are not closed from change. I'm sure there are other ideas that I didn't hear, but there is a paradigm under the pragmatism umbrella that seems to fit these sentiments well, and I would like to introduce moral constructivism for your consideration. Constructivism comes in many flavors, but at root is based on the idea that we create our morals interactively with the world and each other. It is compatible with many spiritual and religious perspectives, but I will share how it can look for an atheist. I think it was well described by Sean Carroll. He's an astrophysicist out of Caltech who now has a joint appointment at Johns Hopkins in the physics and philosophy departments. In his podcast, Mindscape, he summarizes his view as follows, quote, "The universe is what exists. That's what's real. And in that universe, I don't see any moral stances, any moral rules. I see stuff obeying the laws of physics. You can suggest moral rules, you can talk about them, you can debate them, and you can try to persuade others that they exist. But they're not being derived from something deeper than that. Moral constructivism is just the idea that what you and I take to be ethical principles are made up by human beings. There might be good reasons to make up some rather than others, but ultimately they come from within us as judgments. This means what is judged moral is based on our shared subjective experience. But unlike moral relativism, constructivism sees morals as debatable. We can strengthen or weaken the case that a particular view resonates with our experience, and some ideas will be judged as better or worse. However, any view is not final, but contingent on our growth and changing conditions as our society learns better ways of living together. I like to use the analogy of a basketball game. Pick your favorite sport, it's fine, where there are objective rules. So there are definitely right and wrong ways to play within the rules. The rules can be changed. There's no objective right set of rules. But some rules will lead to better or worse games, as any NBA fan can attest. In a pragmatic sense, we have learned that certain morals are better, in that we all absolutely agree genocide is bad and not good. Would this not be subjective realism? I'll leave that for your consideration. Undoubtedly, there are ideas I didn't capture here and other paradigms that overlay our morals. As we commonly hear in UU, we're all growing together and we're never done growing. There's a broad space of moral possibilities we can explore in our growth, and I encourage you to engage in this wonderful construction project as you grow. Our ethics and morals will evolve as we interact to develop ourselves and improve our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. So, Charlie has circled back to Reverend Tiffany's characterization of the ancient gods as sources of evil and caprice to the ethics of our immediate being. He asks if we are any different from those ancient capricious gods. Have we evolved from that model? In the afterword of the book Sapiens, these words are written. 70,000 years ago, Homo sapiens was still an insignificant animal minding its own business in a corner of Africa. In the following millennia, it transformed into the master of the entire planet and the terror of the ecosystem. Despite the astonishing things that humans are capable of doing, we remain unsure of our goals, and we seem to be as disconnected as ever. We are more powerful than ever before, but have very little idea what to do with all that power. Self-made gods with only the laws of physics to keep us company. We are consequently wreaking havoc on our fellow animals and on the surrounding ecosystem, seeking little more than our own comfort and amusement, yet never finding satisfaction. Is there anything more dangerous than dissatisfied and irresponsible gods who don't know what they want? A lot to think about. Thank you all for being with us today. Thank you, Charlie, for a very interesting sermon. And thank you, Dana, for these lovely flowers that are behind me. It was actually her 48th reunion, as she told me. If you're visiting, we invite you to leave your information at the welcoming table, which is back there by the doors, and to grab a brochure. Today at 4 p.m., the Covenant of Unitarian Universalist Pagans will be holding their summer solstice celebration. All of you are welcome. Reverend Tiffany is offering a workshop on Saturday, August 12th. It's called Listening and Caring Skills, and it's an opportunity for anyone who would like to attend to deepen their ability to listen to others. We're looking for some people to help in our tech department during the services. There are 4 jobs available: playing the videos during the service, recording the service, controlling the soundboard during the service, editing and uploading the service videos after the service. If you're interested in any one or all of these jobs, please talk to or email Bradley at rscchair@hvууc.org. And it'd be wonderful if we do get some people to help. There's been a lot of people doing a lot of this work. Soapbox Sunday is coming soon. This is our beloved tradition in which on the Sunday closest to the 4th of July, we celebrate free speech and invite you to get up on your soapbox for a 3 to 5 minute talk. If you have something to say on July 2nd, please talk to Bradley or email him at rscchair@hvууc.org to let him know. Don't think he's here today, so. Okay, and the Rainbow Festival is going to be held in Johnson City on Saturday, June 24th from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. HVUUC will have a booth, and the Social Justice Committee is looking for volunteers. If you're interested, please see Tristan, there's Tristan, after the service.
Okay, so obviously I've guided us all into a dense forest of philosophy today. I know it's easy to get mired in complexities. The best advice I can offer you still rests in the immortal words of Bill S. Preston, Esquire of the Wild Stallions. Be excellent to each other.
Okay. So now Karis will play one more song for us. And again, we thank you all so much for being here, and thank you, Karis, for filling in at very short notice. This is also the time when we pass the offering plate. The contributions that you make to us during the offering support the way we build each other up within this community, and also gives us the resources we need to stretch out into the wider world to make a positive impact. If you're making a pledge payment, please mark it as such. And thank you so much for your contributions.
melting.
Yay, church!